The realistic simulation of water in video games has come a long way since the humble days of 8-bit and 16-bit console gaming. The technical limitations of early gaming systems like the Sega Genesis meant the representation of water was primarily artist-driven. Games such as Echo the Dolphin imitated the appearance of water by bathing the screen in aquatic blue color palettes via transparent foreground effects, supported by adjusting player character physics to reinforce the illusion of buoyant weightlessness when submerged. Through these rudimentary techniques, art design was able to circumvent contemporary technical limitations to create stunning waterscapes. Combined with surface-level color gradients and splash sprite animations, Echo the Dolphin's vibrant subaquatic world is still beautiful to look at today. Whilst this game represents a high point in early video game water effects, it's a far cry from the more advanced techniques to emerge in subsequent years as hardware and development tools became more powerful. Now, I'm not a game designer, so this feature won't be taking a deep dive into the technical aspects behind game developers' strategies to simulate water. Instead, I'll keep the explanations more surface level. However, I do know that realistically representing water presents challenges to game designers, no matter the generation of hardware. Accurately rendering water in games comes at the cost of smooth performance, so the act of circumventing technical limitations via well-considered art styles has remained constant throughout the years. Before we go on though, I think it'd help if I outlined from a player's point of view what I consider to be prerequisites development teams need to consider in order to create immersive water effects. 1. The water must have a believable visual appearance, and 2. The water must exhibit a level of interactivity for the player, whether that's physics-based buoyancy effects like those already mentioned in Echo the Dolphin, or something akin to splash effects if you jump into it. So, moving on from the 16-bit era towards 3D gaming of the mid-90s, and it was at this stage that developers started utilizing normal mapping techniques to visually represent water on a flat surface. If you've ever played a game, then you've seen normal maps in action. Essentially, these are 2D artist-created textures that are usually added to 3D models, or, as is often the case with water, added to a flat plane. To imitate the surface movements of water, developers oscillated multiple artist-made textures in opposite directions. Moving the perceived wave-like textures in opposite directions tricks the eye into seeing the natural movement of water. Combined with primitive caustic effects, that is, the visual representation of light as it shimmers through water or glistens on its surface, then we have believable-looking water. It wasn't until Wave Race 64 released in 1996 that the simulation of water took a giant leap forward in terms of technical achievement. In Wave Race 64, players careen atop water raceways which swell, ebb and flow, with fluidity that's immediately visible whilst exhibiting real-time physical effects on the player's jet ski. This was achieved via mapping artist-created textures to a triangular mesh which could be warped, creating the illusion of fluid. Combined with splash and spray effects, and Wave Race 64 represented the most immersive-looking water seen at the time. Whilst a mechanical marvel, Wave Race 64 didn't exhibit any art stylings typical of water in games that came shortly after, such as reflections. Still, its ability to have racing jet skis react in real time to water wave patterns is rightly commended for raising the bar. A couple of years after Wave Race 64 in 1998 saw the first version of Unreal Engine released. The increased power offered via the game development system meant the multi-layered flat planes could be mapped to higher density triangular meshes, whilst allowing for higher resolution artist-supplied textures. Of course, this is well demonstrated in influential first-person shooter Unreal, with that game's water temple level raising the bar once again for visually stunning, reflective, transparent water. I personally love the turquoise hues that are bouncing atop the water surface in this game. And whilst the water's consistent shifting isn't believable by today's standards, I think it exhibits a lifelike tranquility that I just want to dive right into. Moving onwards still, and I'm highlighting Echo the Dolphin once again. Only this time in Echo the Dolphin Defender of the Future, released in 2000 on the Sega Dreamcast. Whilst we're treated to beautifully animated flat plane textures we've seen before on the water surface, it's this game's rendering of underwater caustic effects that really grabs my attention. Practically every surface, from the underwater rock formations, coral, and even Echo himself, shimmer in refracted light. The subaquatic landscape is alive with shards of light and textured air bubbles. These effects, when combined, are truly immersive, serving as a precursor to the exotic locales of underwater survival epic Subnautica. As we move into the mid-2000s, the technologies available for developers to portray water without rinsing CPU power became standardized, with games on the original Xbox and PlayStation 2, and the GameCube especially, able to render vibrant wave-like effects with lifelike interactivity, with less effect on gameplay performance when compared to previous generations. The increased power of those consoles boosted warpable triangular mesh densities, with higher polygon counts deepening shimmering light refraction and reflection effects. Some of my favourite examples include the slick, shiny surfaces that contrast neatly within the deep shadows of Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, or the deep ripple in Eco's pools, the glistening cinematic cutscenes in Final Fantasy X, the character wake in Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, or the immersive transparency in Metal Gear Solid 3's River of Death. The Nintendo GameCube itself harbored neat ability to render complex effects thanks to its fixed-function GPU. While still limited compared to the PC tech at the time, the GameCube was actually more powerful than the PS2, and this was none more evident than in its gorgeously rendered water designs. Star Fox Adventures and The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess both featured water levels dripping in rippling realism. The former exhibits beautiful glistening water with crystal clear transparency, with you able to see all manner of submerged artifacts distorted by undercurrents. I love the Twilight Princess's water effects in the Lakebed Temple level too, particularly the playful interactivity of Link's splashing footsteps. Hell, even the port of Sonic Adventure to GameCube had console-exclusive water design. The pinnacle of water up to this point in time, however, has to be Super Mario Sunshine. Thanks to the GameCube's aptitude for mip mapping, whereby the resolution of textures will change depending on their proximity to the game's camera. In Super Mario Sunshine's case, it had rendered textures transparent if they were up close. In terms of water, this means that the player can see right through to the bottom of the area they're swimming in, or if far away, the water would transition to bright shards reflecting tidal patterns on the ocean's surface. Super Mario Sunshine demonstrates all the techniques described in this feature up to now, but with added pizzazz. The normal mapping technique of panning textures we've seen time and again was instead blended with the game world's background, beautifully melting dusky colours of sunset into the game's tranquil pools. It truly was exceptional art style, melded with super fun aqueous interactivity. The only downside was the drop in frame rate, as once again, all of this realistically simulated water comes at a price. The original Microsoft Xbox, released in 2001, featured clever tech in the form of programmable shaders, which enabled water effects, textures, caustics, and lighting to be rendered by the shaders program. Ripple effects across water surfaces took a leap towards realism during this era, with Far Cry 1 and 2, Half-Life 2 and Halo Combat Evolved leading the way in rendering textures and distortion before applying to a scene via pixel shaders, shaping the water's surface. Those titles, especially Far Cry 1 and 2, were able to incorporate the proximity effect demonstrated so successfully in Super Mario Sunshine 2. The water's appearance was clear when near to the player and reflective when far away, all in the same scene with consistent frame rate. Xbox launch title Transworld Surf is an exceptional example of water effects and their evolution on upgraded hardware. Taking advantage of the Xbox's processing power, Transworld Surf was able to map multiple reflective, high-definition textures to huge, natural-looking wave shapes, presumably created by high-density triangular mesh geometry. I really appreciate how the developer were able to alter the appearance of the water depending on its position in the wave. For instance, water in the wave's crest appears smoother than the rough white water in the trough. The programmable shaders were harnessed to good effect too, with water glistening as if oil. Combined with slick, shiny surfers and the water particle effects splashing the in-game camera, then Transworld Surf sticks out as a forebearer for realistic water effects and a sign of things to come. Amazingly still, Transworld Surf was able to run at a smooth 60 frames per second on the Xbox, a rate at which the GameCube games struggled to maintain. Worth noting is Transworld Surf's nomination for GameSpot's Best In-Game Water Award in 2001, which it lost to Wave Race Blue Storm, itself a remarkable title for in-game water. Released as a launch title for the Nintendo GameCube, Blue Storm created believable reflections in the water by inverting above-water objects to appear upside down before rendering their image to textures that could then be distorted. The result was an oftentimes jagged reflection, implying a water surface violently shaken by racing jet skis. On a related note, I want to highlight two heavily water-centric games, and specifically, their different approaches to portraying water. First up is Bioshock 2. Now, the water in Bioshock 2 was all-encompassing, surrounding the underwater city of Rapture. Whilst it didn't break the mold in terms of pushing new technologies to portray its water, it instead, like the early days of 16-bit game design, took an artist-led approach, relying less on technical systems to simulate water and instead focusing on its appearance and attention to detail. This visual-first approach is seen throughout Rapture, with water trickling through cracked glass corridors, collecting in pools which glisten in the city's Art Deco lighting. Peering through water into a flood-filled space is especially well done, as floor tiles realistically dance beneath the surface, owing to incredibly well-implemented refraction and distortion effects. There are captivating water caustic effects on display too, with shimmering light reflecting off the walls and ceilings, creating a truly immersive environment, one which feels as though the ocean could come crashing through the walls at any minute. As an aside, the water in Bioshock 2 is purely visual. It's not a simulation of water, and it certainly wasn't volumetric. For a more systems-driven approach to portraying water in games, I'd like to highlight Hydrophobia. Developed inside its own bespoke game engine and released in 2010, Hydrophobia includes the textured effects on the water surface and triangular mesh that I've spoken about at length in this feature, but the water here is simulated, it's volumetric. What this means is the water reacts to its environment, flowing from one area to the next. Whilst any flooding in Bioshock 2 was scripted, the water in Hydrophobia exhibits a tangibility. It feels more alive to be submerged in a space with a finite amount of water. Gameplay-wise, this meant that the developers could incorporate tense puzzles in support of its survival horror narrative. Rooms could slowly fill with water, with the need to drain away urgent. It's a level of interaction between player and water which hadn't been seen before. The flip side of this systems-led approach is the behavior of the water oftentimes acted unnaturally. For example, its surface waves appeared unnecessarily violent, as if subject to adverse weather, undercurrents, or strong winds, despite being indoors. Whether you prefer the artist-led approach or a portraying of water rendered as simulation is up to you. Both Bioshock 2 and Hydrophobia succeed in what they set out to do. The 2010s saw widespread implementation of techniques to simulate water, such as Vertex Displacement. This technique allows developers to control the position of triangular mesh vertices via programmable shaders. Combined with texture tessellation and generating meshes in 3 dimensions, developers could move beyond water existing on a flat plane. What this means in layman's terms is broader ability to move the water surface became possible, making wave shapes flow more realistically, with potential for ever more lifelike interaction between player, objects, and water. Up until this point, the most realistic-looking water in games came at high computational cost, whereas the simpler normal mapping method of portraying water was less resource-intensive, albeit at a cost of realistic fluidity. Games which led the way in terms of superb water during the 2010s included Super Mario Galaxy 2, Grand Theft Auto 5, Horizon Zero Dawn, Red Dead Redemption 2, Just Cause 2, and beyond. A couple of games which push this tech to untold limits both take place on the open seas, with command of hulking great pirate ships the primary gameplay mechanic. Yes, I'm talking about Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag and Sea of Thieves. Both of these games feature rough sea surfaces which undulate at great heights for miles. The level of believable interactivity between the pirate ships and the game's crashing waves is a technical marvel. But what both these games demonstrate is the ability Vertex Displacement provides to include a hyper-stylized artistic approach too. Both Sea of Thieves and Black Flag feature beautiful lighting effects, with sunlight seeping through cresting waves, adjusting the watercolor, and glistening in the sea spray. At this feature's outset, I outlined what I believed water in games needed to be truly immersive. Once again, I think it must look believable, and it must exhibit a level of interactivity, either for the player or against the objects in the game's environment. It's this toss-up between water which behaves realistically versus purely impressive appearances which developers have grappled with for decades. With the recent release of Unreal Engine 5, and with it the continued development of its advanced particles VFX system, whereby developers can add modifiers to particles and adjust their behaviors, we can expect complete visual and interactive believability in video games reaching a new peak. In my opinion, Horizon Forbidden West offers the best rendition of water seen so far. Guerrilla Games have harnessed all of the techniques I've briefly touched upon in this 2-part feature, and I'm sure that there's a ton more that is beyond the scope of my limited understanding. I just love how the water is portrayed in this game, how it reflects the scorched hues of dusk, the transparent particle effects that move with the undercurrent, the reflection of tidal sand patterns in shallow water surfaces. I could go on. I'm constantly excited by the possibilities of water effects in games. I hope that they continue moving towards perfect blending of technical prowess and stylized artistry. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. Have anything to say? Let us know in the comments below. Also, we upload new videos every single day on GamingBolt, so please consider subscribing as it really helps us out. Thanks for watching.